When we would teach class, this silly little print called Beggars Receiving Alms at the door of a house would get under my skin and choke me up. It's a scene of people coming to a house with a Dutch door and literally needing some help. There's a woman with a baby strapped to her back. There's an older man. They're in obviously not as elaborate clothing, but they're being taken care of. Someone is reaching out and extending mercy. That sense of society has always made me marvel at what Rembrandt can tell. Again, with no harsh judgment. He's not mocking them. It just got me.
Hey everybody, my name is Anne Shafer and I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. You have found us at Platemark. This is Series 2, A History of Western Printmaking, also known as our shared visual culture. I'm joined on this journey by Tru Ludwig, who is an artist and art historian, as well as a printmaker who has the gift of gab, of making art history easy, fun, and understandable. I have always believed that art should not be hard. We shouldn't be trying to use language to talk about it that's going to exclude a lot of people. So here we are with our most colloquial history of prints. Today we're talking about Rembrandt van Rijn. This is the second of 3 episodes on Rembrandt. This one covers genre scenes, or scenes of everyday life, and also portraiture. Rembrandt is and remains, I would say, probably the artist that gets looked at and revived in the hearts and minds of printmakers more than anyone else, again and again over the centuries. He was the best etcher. He perfected the whole etching situation with timed bitings and multiple bitings to get different levels of darkness, but he also never used any tone or passages with aquatint or any other technique. So when you look at those prints that are dark, that are nighttime scenes or interiors, take a look at those dark areas. It's all line. All of it is line. He's also the best at capturing characters from all walks of life. So much so that you can really, I find myself empathizing with every last one of them. He gets across in seriously economic means and use of line, emotion and love, thoughtfulness, depression, joy, fear, respect, and all of those things in a matter of lines. So let's get into episode 2 of 3. We'll let Tru take us on this crazy adventure with Rembrandt. Buckle up, here we go. Hey, this is Platemark. I'm here with Tru Ludwig.
Hello.
Hello. We are rolling on through Rembrandt. This is the second of 3 episodes.
You know, it's interesting, Anne, that Rembrandt's going to take 3 episodes.
We're turning to genre and portraiture.
This is the thing with Rembrandt. He's so innovative. He's so questing in just what makes something interesting. He's so involved in life around him and respectful of that. Even though he can't manage his finances for crap, according to Simon Sheamy, he was a horrible little man. There's some real interesting dirt on him after his beloved Saskia dies in 1642. We're not even that far yet. The problem with Rembrandt is also, though, for me, that trying to talk about him is like I feel on the days that I have to talk about Rodin for the modernism class. It's like, I am not worthy. I just couldn't possibly bring to it what it requires, because if you don't look carefully, you're going to miss something in Rembrandt and be able to see the breadth and depth of what he's managed to invent. We are going to pick up with genre scenes, which is that lovely sense of the everyday that Rembrandt could give to his religious scenes. One of the things that makes those so approachable is that they have such a human level to them, unbelievably human level. Now, there were other artists in Holland that were doing genre scenes, but Rembrandt is the one that gave him that kind of freshness. I'm bringing up this image of a pancake woman that was created by Adrian Ostade, who was doing scenes of peasant life, very popular with the collectors. Now, it's also interesting to think about the image you're seeing here, Anne, because there on the right, I have an image of a woman who's busily making pancakes over a little grill. There are little boys sitting with her. It's an interior. It's very high contrast. What else are you noticing about it?
So this is the Ostata, and it's circa 1626.
Correct.
Right. Well, it's kind of boring.
Except for that high contrast, right?
Except for the high contrast, yeah.
Now, it's an old, kind of a haggard woman. We're definitely inside. It's as though somebody had said, you know, that Bruegel dude had this cool concept. Let's pay attention to peasants. We have much to learn from them. And in North countries, the attention to peasants and their ways was far more respectful than it had been in the South. There was also a societal concept that you needed to help everyone along. By Rembrandt's time, it's that the peasants were even doing better than they had been before. Some of them even had certain kinds of possessions. They might have pieces of iron and tin. It wasn't just this abject poverty that we would have seen in the prior century. This image of the peasant by Ostata is, well, it has, I'm going to say, Caravaggesque lighting. It's like phenomenal high contrast, but it's very finished, isn't it? It's really static.
Yeah.
And it's an old woman, and there's fire, and there are little children that are obviously warming their little hands, and
But nobody looks real.
and it's frozen.
Yeah.
And then on the left, I'm showing Anne the 1635, The Pancake Woman by Rembrandt. And it's, to me, quite informative to compare these two. And tell me what you got from this.
Well, it's almost the same woman, honestly. They have the same nose and chin, and I mean, it's kind of crazy that way. But it's more lively probably because of the sketchy line work, the autographic line. And he just captures people's characters so much better.
Well, they're in motion too, right?
Yeah.
The most draftsmanly attention is on the old woman who is dutifully making her pancakes, and she's in her own zone. She's in her own thoughts, and there's absolute bedlam if you think about it. She's out on the street probably making the pancakes, street food, and there's a little kid watching her, and there's somebody else leaning over her shoulder, a couple people gabbing behind her. There's a woman with a baby on her lap behind the pancake woman, and down in the very foreground, it's absolutely hilarious. There's a baby who has had their pancake in his little fat hands, and there's a dog like really wants that pancake, and the baby's like trying to get away. And look at this little torn up face. I mean, but it is a glow with life.
Is that a cat behind the dog?
Could very well be. It's a teeny weeny print. It's one that
is it that small?
Yeah, it's quite small.
Oh, wow.
If you look at the size of his signature, you can tell that it's pretty small. His focus on these genre seeds, he did a whole bunch of them in the 1630s. And again, who's buying what and for what reason. But this pancake woman is so much more lively. It's the same technique as the Ostata, but it is alive. It's not just the wibbly quality of the line, it's his ability to leave things out too. You know, the Ostata has to put in absolutely everything.
Well, and the text that's underneath the Ostata image is so florid and in sort of, I don't know.
That looks that looks engraved, and it looks like he was making something for someone's Kunstkabinet. Here is an image of a peasant, and you'll enjoy that because
for the pancake woman herself.
No, but this one almost looks like something that the pancake woman could eventually own. There's something just adorably fresh about it. And rowdy slice of life kind of things, which is one of the things that I enjoy about Dutch paintings like Jan Steen and all of those. That's body, anything that's body and having a good time at a bar, I'm going to be down with. But we also see that Rembrandt is not afraid of showing things like beggars and lepers and Saskia in bed and little snippets of everyday life that are sketched directly on the plate.
Saskia is his wife.
Yes. Saskia van Eulenburg, and he'll marry her this same year, I believe, or very soon thereafter. Let's see. This was done in 1630, and in 1633, he marries Saskia.
So he's already married her by this pancake person.
And he's 30 in the year they're married in 1635, and she is 30 when she dies after their 13 years of marriage. So 30-year-old Rembrandt married a 17-year-old lovely girl who is the orphaned daughter of Eulenburg, who was a wealthy guy, and it worked out real well. But Rembrandt was head over heels in love with Saskia. She was the love of his life. Let's go on to this next genre scene, and let's think about the rat catcher, or not so prettily in another book, was the rat poison seller. I don't think that's not quite as nice, because the rat catcher is really what this guy is if you look at it. It's an image done by an observer of everyday life. And it is indeed a rat catcher. And do you remember showing this? What would the students do when they saw it?
Well, I think that finally when they saw the rats dangling from the guy's basket, which is on a top of a pole that he's holding, they were like, "What is happening?"
Yeah, because he's performing a service and he's catching the rats and getting them out of these people's homes. And he's going from door to door saying, do you need me to get your rats? And obviously he's that's a sign of his, good industry. What's this halfway door where the guy's leaning over the door?
The Dutch.
You mean that Dutch door, the half door, so that you would have the air flowing through, but anything else except for maybe rats couldn't get in. It's essentially a somewhat ragged street person coming to the door of someone who has a fairly nice home, and he's being paid over the Dutch door. And it's an encounter that seems to me fairly equal. What do you think?
Sure looks like it.
It's though, look at the man who's paying is actually looking back into the house like, hey, honey, da 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 da. He's talking to her, but he's also paying the rat catcher. And the idea of making sure that even, those folks that have to do their trade from door to door are taken care of is one of the responsibilities of citizens in Dutch society. It always impresses me enormously to see that Rembrandt sketches, that they're sketched, these scenes, onto the plate with non-judgmental, not satirical input, that he's there to be a chronicler of everyday life. It's
They're
not
gentle, really.
They really are quite lovely and gentle. And even here, again, he has the ability to draw us from the foreground to the background. And if you think about how dim the other houses further down the street behind the rat catcher are, they're melting away. It's tremendously cinematic. And then we get to see the grisly truth of how successful this guy is, and this little helper is probably his son. And
There's a rat on his shoulder?
yeah, it is. Must be. Maybe it's his bait rat. Maybe he's got them because they're pretty smart.
Yeah. Fascinating.
So,
And he's got a friend for a rat, and then he's going to kill the other rat.
yeah, and then they'll eat each other.
Okay.
City kitties is what we call them here in Baltimore.
Right.
Anyway, when we would teach class, an image would get under my skin and choke me up. And this silly little, 6.5 inch by 4.5 inch print called Beggars Receiving Alms at the door of a house. It just got me. There was something going on in the world at the time. And it was, how can we take care of our own? And it's a scene of people, again, coming to a house with a Dutch door and literally needing some help. There's a woman with a baby strapped to her back. There's an older man, maybe it's her father and then a child. And they're in obviously not as elaborate clothing, but they're being taken care of. Someone is reaching out and extending mercy and extending helpful material to someone who needs help. And that sense of society has always made me marvel at what Rembrandt can tell, again, with no harsh judgment. He's not mocking them. This is done in 1648. And it's interesting also to notice by this time he's 42 and his life has started to fall apart because he'd been married to beautiful, lovely, wonderful Saskia. And she dies in 1642, and he's fallen on financial hard times. And he painted this massive painting of the night watch for the town. And there might be some grumblings about how that wasn't okay. But he had been cock of the walk. He was, high profile. He's making great prints. All this is happening. And you can see his life being played out in the images that he selects to do. But this one is just people taking care of each other. And it's so sweet. If it had been a Callot, who was a printmaker we'll talk about, they would be much more satirical in some respects, but it was his ability to turn to another person and actually give a damn, as opposed to any other kind of society. It choked me up one day. We were talking about that in class.
Well, I can see why. Compositionally, he's done something interesting. The longer I'm looking at this, look at the way he's got, the center for me really is the exchange of the money. It's her hand. So he's got this shadow coming up the side of the door jamb, but then it's dropped off so that her hand is against this stark white background. So the whole thing centers in on this exchange.
It has that same kind of power. It's a wonderful observation. It's the same kind of power as that 1 inch between God and Adam on the Sistine ceiling, And the way he helps accomplish that is that white wall is in high contrast because it's her shadow that's on the wall that creates the contrast, that frames. It's so honest, and he's almost lovingly taken care of their faces and look at even at the slight tilt of her head and the old man's face. And it's just very few strokes. And it's baffling how that can be accomplished. You could overwork that like a watercolor and kill it. And there's detail, there's depth, but there's also this incredible freedom, which we will see him use with such elegance in other images. I thought I'd throw a couple in that are just kind of weird, but some that we don't normally see.
I have not seen this one.
I had never seen it either, but when I started looking through stuff for this particular show, I came across the death appearing to a wedded couple from an open grave.
Wow.
But they're still, a young couple in their wedding garb, and they're walking up, and here's a skeleton little coming up out of the basement.
He looks like a troll under a bridge.
Kind of, right? And look, there's his scythe. It's thinking, well, be happily married, but remember, you will die.
Well, and I mean, it makes perfect sense, but her back is to the viewer. You're supposed to present your subjects to your audience, right?
But he's doing that thing that Giotto figured out, which is you're standing right behind her in line.
Right.
You're next.
Yes.
And so in a way, they're moralizing, and in another way, they're a little funny. And then here's another, just for fun, because they're very genre.
Nice.
And I've always enjoyed the title, A Woman Making Water. Aside that is another print of a man making water. Did you want to explain this? What's saying?
Okay, these are...
Or you can just read the...
These are two prints from the Rijksmuseum collection. We did not have these in Baltimore.
No, we did.
But there's a woman squatting against a tree, looks like, and she's piddling. And then there's a separate print where the man is, just peeing out in the open.
Doing what guys do and whip it out and just do it. Now, I'm going to read to you. I love the way the Rijksmuseum makes their quotes. It's very sweet. It says, the man assumes a confident stance and, without taking off his knapsack, produces a powerful stream. The woman does her business behind a tree and keeps a lookout for anyone who might be watching. Nowadays, we deem these kinds of scenes as vulgar and inappropriate, but in Rembrandt's day, they were a popular source of amusement. And I just wanted to share that with you because it's not often we see Rembrandt bring,
No,
but this is...
We have seen people throwing up at other...
Yeah, but
places,
I've never seen Rembrandt have any pukers in his and the making one. But wait, there's more because here's a genre scene too.
Hello.
Just because. Just fine. Sorry. Because Rembrandt did do a few nudes here and there, and he had many very spontaneous seeming sketches, and Anne is almost chop fallen. Go ahead and tell me what you got.
Well, it's a monk, for God's sake. Making love to a woman against the edge of a cornfield or something, wheat field maybe. Circa 1646.
And it's just...
And I mean, it's really right there.
Oh, yeah. Like, you are there.
You are right there coming upon these people who are going at it.
And the foreshortening on the knees is really powerful, isn't it?
It's crazy.
And it's a monk. Now you got to wonder, oh, look, there's actually somebody over there just working.
Working away.
And so is he, right? The monk is working away too.
Well, and maybe she was working in the field earlier.
I don't know. Maybe so. So there's
I assume it's a she.
Yeah, I thought about that. And I'm going to...
I mean, they are in the missionary pose, so let's go with it.
Thank you, Anne.
You're welcome.
That was really engaging.
Just for you, Tom.
Tom, this is for you. Actually, everybody needs to know that Rembrandt could go from the sublime to the ridiculous. That's right. The zenith and the nadir.
I've never seen this one before.
Well, I couldn't pass it up.
No kidding.
I mean, come on.
That's
something that sells, right?
Yes.
Hey, emoji, right? Thank you, Marc Antonio Raimondi. Well,
Yeah.
Rembrandt could do that too. I wonder if he owned any of those too. Anywho, we have just talked about genre scenes, and now I would like for Anne to share another taste of genre scenes from Rembrandt's time, because it's about time that we had some fun talking about women artists,
Right.
because they existed too.
They did exist. At the beginning of the pandemic, I started writing posts to put on a blog and also on Facebook. I was focusing on things that I had either acquired for the museum or wanted to and didn't succeed in. But then suddenly I thought, hey, we haven't really looked at or talked about women artists in the early period of printmaking. So
And I think they were not sought after. You talked about Diana Scultori. It'll pick up in the late 19th century, but until then, it's basically, let's just say it, dead white guys, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, so Geertruydt Roghman, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that Dutch name.
It's probably just Gertrude, but
Geertruydt Roghman.
yep.
Okay. Wow, you have her as active from 1640 to 1650, but I think we found some dates. Yeah. 1625 is when she was born, and she died in 1657 at age not very much, 27.
Well, that
Right?
probably, and it because childbearing is the single most dangerous thing you could possibly do.
Yeah.
Ah,
Right. As you might imagine, for women artists, as we spoke about with Diana Scultori, she came from a large family of already artists and printmakers. So her father was an engraver. His name was Hendrik Lamberts Roghman. Her maternal grandfather was Jacob Savory II. He was a painter and etcher.
where?
They're all in Flanders.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Huh.
Her great uncle was the Flemish painter and printmaker Roland Savory,
Oh, okay.
who was under the patronage of Rudolph II, the Holy Roman Emperor.
Wow.
Right. And Gertrude's brother Roland and sister Magdalena were also artists, and the three siblings worked with their father in his print shop.
It's interesting that Gertrude is doing what she's doing since she's in such a Flemish kind of a moment. I find that absolutely fascinating. The bleed through is sort of like paying attention to daily tasks like Bruegel did.
Right. Yeah.
It tells you that there's a market for it. Obviously.
Right. So she worked as a reproductive engraver, and we'll look at one of those. And she also made 14 landscape etchings after her brother's drawings. And they were in their early 20s when I'm sure he was sitting there with her when she was making them. Maybe how she learned how to make them.
Mm-hmm.
But she is best known for a set of 5 prints of her own designs, not after anybody else. And they show women engaged in daily household tasks. And they're remarkable for their banality.
Yeah.
Really.
And it's because it's a respect for seeing women fully clad, doing a job, and it's nothing. It's really just delightful to see something that straight ahead. It's not as dull as the pancake woman.
Yeah, they do have a different feeling to them for sure. In 4 of them, there's a single anonymous woman who's going about her day. One is of her ruffling some fabric. One is of spinning yarn. One is cooking, and then cleaning cookware. And then in a 5th print, there are 2 women sewing, which is sort of interesting. It's the only one with 2 figures. And interestingly, in 2 of them, the lone figures are with their backs turned to the audience, which is kind of cool. So, we've talked about why we might be seeing things of genre-esque whatever, so I'm going to skip over that part. But the Metropolitan, they always have good things to say about a lot of things. And they say, in comparing Roghman's images of household servants with those of people like Gerrit do,
who was, by the way, apprentice to Rembrandt.
There you go, and Johannes Vermeer, it is tempting to distinguish male and female points of view, as some critics have rather emphatically. But whatever the interpretation, it is important to bear in mind that Roghman's prints were intended for a broad art market, whereas Dou's famously expensive paintings and The Milkmaid by Vermeer were made for individual collectors, for instance. So she was doing it for a market, and they're sort of nutso.
Why? Why do you say nutso?
Well, it's just, I think because of the Rembrandt, when he's doing the work for people, is usually, well, maybe I'm wrong, but they're interacting with other people.
Yes.
It's showing like a societal kind of understanding of roles and status and class and all that stuff. And these are, you're not sure if these are servant women or the ladies of the house, or, there's sort of a kind of a
but these
unknown something.
That's the women, their interior, and that's the interiority of womanhood in that age. If you think about guys are all out in public, you don't see as many women being. I mean, even with the portraits that we are going to look at, it's almost invariably all men. And the Dutch, and I would imagine certainly some of the Flemish, would be proud of their hardworking, thrifty, devoted hausfrau. Whether or not these are servants, I think they are extolling women, particularly the one who's leaning over. Let's see those because they're really quite delightful.
Oh, this one, she's in the kitchen.
Yeah. And this one, maybe she is of the servant class, but it's a woman that is at work with a nice strong back. It's a beautifully composed scene. The woman occupies the right third of the image. And we've got this beautiful window behind her that's shedding light on her. And then you have this large kitchen with various tools. It's very carefully observed. And again, sort of like the Rembrandt Beggars, it's showing us the facts of the everyday life of a woman of the house. And that's something we don't even get to see from Rembrandt. And that's the thing I enjoy about this.
Right.
You know?
No, yeah, no, you're right. And then the last thing to talk about Roghman is her career. It was a short career, obviously, because she died at 27, but she makes a reproductive engraving of a famous Tintoretto painting that is in the Scuola in Venice. Let's see. She made an engraving of the Massacre of the Innocents, but after a print by Egidius Sadler. So Sadler's print reproduces the painting by Tintoretto, which is in the Scuola Grande di San Rocco in Venice.
So it's a reproduction of a reproduction.
So it's a print after a painting.
Yeah.
Right. So, and the Massacre of the Innocents, for those of you who may have forgotten your biblical whatever, is the story of Herod, who set out to kill every infant boy in Bethlehem, knowing that one of them would become Jesus Christ. It's gruesome, obviously, because all these little children are being killed. The male child of every person in Bethlehem is being killed. And apparently there's some thought that in the painting that's in the Scuola in Venice, that they added a plaster forearm to the bottom of the composition to bring it verisimilitude, which is hilarious. But in the prints, obviously, you can't do that. So the woman's arm is tucked under her in both of the prints by Sadler and by Roghman.
Kind of neat if they'd broken the box, but
I know. Well, they do sort of. So, yeah. Yeah. So Rothman's engraving after Sadler. So here's the Sadler, and it's right reading. It's the same orientation as the painting. And you see in the address along the bottom that the arm that was a plaster cast hanging off is now breaking the line of the address. So that he did do that.
That's got a real manners. The Sadler, that it has such a sense of a mannerist. Mannerism is like the gateway drug to the Baroque, and there is this writhing strangeness, and it's all kind of pushed to the edges.
Yeah, and the painting likewise is equally frenetic. It's kind of nuts. The engraving on it is quite something. I'll put some details up for everybody to see.
Goodness, grab that little ankle and swing that baby around.
Yeah, so in the Roghman version, it's flipped. So she's drawing it directly probably from Sadler because she doesn't, I believe, go to Italy to see this thing. It's interesting for me as somebody who has, for a hot second, looked at the theater and how coming in from stage left means one thing, coming in from stage right means another thing. So this flip of this gigantically diagonal composition changes as you flip from Sadler to Roghman. It's fascinating to see the differences.
Because when it spills from left to right, it has much more dynamism. And when things spill from the right to the left, they seem to slow down.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's much more static. In fact, it almost looks like it could be Poussin, who isn't going to be around. Well, no, he's going to be working right about then. So it's got that strange frozen stiffness to it.
Yeah. But she is an accomplished engraver.
She's learning her cross contours. She's looked at her Holtzius for sure.
Yeah, like she's clearly making some play at being an engraver as a career.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But then there's, you go back to those 5 very intimate women in the household things, and there's this real sort of dichotomy and it's fantastic that she was able to do those 5 on her own. And they're known to us. They survived somehow. Just imagine being a female artist in this time. It's crazy.
Pretty much in any time.
Well, yes, that's true.
So certainly up until the second half, even the early 20th century, it was still pretty frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's rough fun for us.
But it does still give us the knowledge that genre scenes can be interesting. And it's also just great to know that a woman artist could say, I'm going to do these things, dang it. And they're interesting. And I'm going to make something that can be made in multiples. There had to have been some audience for them because you don't spend all that time committing something to copper unless it means something to you. This quality of Geertruydt Roghman's images are quite in contrast, because those were all engravings, are quite in contrast to the marvelous, sketchy, autographic quality of Rembrandt. There are times when it looks like he could just have dashed something off with a light little pencil and then bitten it in a plate so you can have it forever. The thing that's wonderful also, though, as Rembrandt is learning to do what he's going to do with etching, he really starts etching about 1628. And he really in earnest starts selling them and putting his name on them by the early 1630s. And by 1634, he has fully moved to Amsterdam and he's been admitted to the Guild of St. Luke, the Guild of the Painters. Tell me what you think. I put a little assortment up here of these selfies by Rembrandt. They're literally selfies, aren't they?
Yes, they are selfies. They're tiny little things. They're probably 2.5 by 2.5 ish,
Mm-hmm.
most of them. And they're self portraits of the man himself. And they're in all sorts of facial expressions. One is surprise, and one is like, what? And one's laughing. And he made bazillions of these, didn't he?
He did it. Some sources will say as many as 80 self-portraits.
80 self portraits in print. Like, that's kind of.
Well, not necessarily in print, but
Okay.
in life and paint.
Okay.
But still.
Still.
That's a lot. Okay. But these, unlike the fully painted oil canvases of him with the artist with the circle behind him, you can track Rembrandt's life through just Google Rembrandt self-portraits. It's fascinating. But this little batch that you're looking at right here,
They're like sketchbook sketches.
they are totally sketchbook sketches. And what he's doing is already studying facial expressions and the turn of the head.
Because the cheapest model is
Yourself. Absolutely. At this point, I don't think it's just that he's all about himself. The one that I think everyone should be aware of is him looking at the camera going, oh, with his pursed lips and the little worried eyebrows. But it's these kinds of studies that and managing how to render his peculiar, bushy, curly hair that is going to be so useful to him as he moves forward into some of other images. You can see that Rembrandt is already showing his proclivity for different kinds of costumes, sometimes borrowing apparel from 100 years earlier that has come to be recognized as meaningful for the more wealthy. But the one that Anne and I are both fans of is Rembrandt's self-portrait with Saskia, which he completed in 1636. And it's a delightful print. It's actually much smaller than I remember. It's 4 inches tall it's essentially square, 4 inches square. It was made as a recognition of their marriage in one respect. And you can tell that he had done this portrait of Saskia, his wife, in the background, and then added himself later because you can actually see part of her coming through his sleeve in one spot. If you were to cover up the Rembrandt part of the guy, you could see that it was something that he was anticipating. But what it is also not only a proclamation of their marriage to each other, but it's also him saying, I am indeed an artist, because he is holding an artist's tool, something that has a crayon on each end of it. And you can see that he's been scribing or drawing something that's immediately in front of him. And he's wearing one of those large flat caps, which he eventually became known for, which are actually a symbol from 100 years earlier. And it's just a marvelous portrait of him looking straight at us and she's looking at him. But it's already an interesting staging of viewpoints. I don't think he's upstaging her. I think, again, in a Geertruydt Roghman kind of a way, her place is in the home. That's where she is. And he has done a very loving reading of her face. He would say her pud face.
Pud face?
Oh, yeah. He was always saying that.
Because she's chubby?
Chubby, but she also has kind of a weak chin.
I see.
There's some very interesting articles out there. I've been reading up on Rembrandt's, absolute love of his beloved Saskia. And there was an interesting article that I stumbled across where one is a goddess, one is a mistress, and one is a maid. Because there are three main women in his life, and Saskia was, the high point and was the one that gave him children, only but one of which survived until we'll get to her later. We don't have any images of his third lady. Nevertheless, anything you want to share about this remarkable portrait?
It's in his usual autographic, like he's drawing in a sketchbook style, although he himself is more finished, quote unquote. But it's just so sort of, here we are.
It's 1636, and already there's a market for him to do self-portraits, which I think is fascinating. This is no longer, let's look at different kinds of expressions. It's a way that portraiture is indeed something that you're going to want to pay attention to. Rembrandt would do these beautiful studies, or even sometimes more finished portraits of Saskia, with pearls in her hair or as a little Jewish bride or what have you. And he really obviously enjoyed viewing his wife, without question. He would do her in more formalized representations, but then by the 1636, he's also doing a whole page of sketches of just her or maybe one other old woman, so that it almost looks like a page from a sketchbook.
It does.
That's a print that you can sell, and it shows that people are interested in the possibility of things that don't have to be completely, air quotes, finished, that it can have that appearance of being a page of sketches. And every time it matters, you can also see him writing his name backward and the date quite expertly. But it's wonderful to see these varying studies of the fleeting kinds of expressions that are across the face. The one in the top right corner with that hand to the mouth is stunning and so simple. And simple isn't easy, but boy, has he done it. So there we have the Saskia, and the one all of us are used to seeing is the Rembrandt sitting with his elbow on a stone sill. This was done in 1639. Now, he is absolutely at the top of his career. He's at the top of his mark. It's actually much larger than I ever remembered. The plate itself is 8 inches by 6.5 inches. That's a very large self-portrait. That's, it's two-thirds. This is 2/3 the size of a juror. Thinking about what Rembrandt knows about the past, he shops the past. He knows the past because, as I'd said earlier, he has collections of prints by the Spanish dudes, but also Lucas van Leyden, but also Dürer. And this particular portrait, which I really enjoy, is Rembrandt with this beret on, which is actually a holdover from an older time. And it's based on a portrait that Raphael had done of, let's see, is it Baldassare Castiglione? It's of a portrait of a humanist that was done in Italy that Rembrandt really appreciated. And it went on auction in Amsterdam in 1639.
And how did he see it?
Exactly. So it was on auction in Amsterdam. He saw it and he wants to show himself in the same kind of highfalutin way as the Raphael. I wanted to let you see how carefully Rembrandt is trying to ally himself with the imprimatur of humanists of the past, and being aware of Raphael's painting is a very simple background, but this pose of Baldassare Castiglione in a 3/4 pose towards us that's been done by Raphael, and Rembrandt has taken the same sense of the headdress and leaning and having the hands show. Actually, this Castiglione portrait, it's essentially the male version of Mona Lisa. It was that important to the people of the day, respecting how true to sight it was and how it elevated the intellectual capacity of this humanist scholar who had managed to rise to being a part of the court. And it's a similar thing where Rembrandt is really rising to the point of being in the upper middle class and being a part of those folks that he's going to make works for. You really want me to be your portraitist. And the thing I also really, really enjoy about this is that Rembrandt is wearing a beret. And it's a kind of a nice rumply one, but it is why, if you were to go to commencement at Maryland Institute College of Art, you would notice that none of our students graduate wearing mortarboards. They all wear black velvet berets that look almost exactly like this. Yep. And I love it. I just think it's marvelous.
It's perfect for art school.
Of course it is. Thank you, Rembrandt. All right. It just delights me to no end.
And Raphael.
Yeah, well, but I think, don't you think it's amazing that Amsterdam is so wealthy that they can have a Raphael painting, one of his most famous portraits, being auctioned in Amsterdam?
Yeah, that's crazy.
And Rembrandt's like, ooh, I saw that. I really love it. So that same year, he gives us an image that we now call the Goldware. And we have one of those at the Baltimore Museum of Art. In fact, we had a BMA special. You want to tell them about it?
Oh my God, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, it was framed together with.
It was a counterproof, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And there was an additional mustache and goatee maybe and pencil on it?
Yeah, because it's funny, as I was researching, I found one what's in an earlier state, and he's got all of the trappings. Like I can do these still lifes. I can do the gold weighing, the scales, like the weighing of souls, and this is a tax collector, but the guy has no face yet. And so the counterproof that we have is he's still working out getting a face just right of this person that he's
Forgotten that.
related to by marriage,
Right.
who is a tax collector, literally. In
How do you pronounce his name?
well, here we've got Jan Utenboog-Beggars.
Beggars.
Let's just call him the gold wearer,
Okay.
because that's easier to say.
We're going to call somebody Dutch and say, help.
But it's interesting. Rembrandt's using the same kind of 16th century outfit for the tax collector, but it's also a moralizing kind of a warning. Don't get taken in. Don't think that you will steal the taxes that you take. And there's even a warning behind, because there's a painting on the wall with an extra little message in it that gives more credence to this interior, which is worked all the way to the edges. You realize that this thing, he's worked it like unlike anything else we've seen yet.
Yeah.
Completely
Fully rendered.
all the way. The interior has completely been described, every last bit of it.
Is that a crucifix?
It seems to be.
Huh.
And more research will tell us exactly what painting it was, because it was in the records of the family and la 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 la. But it's a marvelous still life, and there's a beautiful interaction of the tax collector as he's writing notes in a book, which is rumpled and looking tremendously true to sight. And this young fellow who's bringing more materials for him to work with. All of those little candid kinds of bits, even in this very worked, it doesn't have the stasis that others were doing. Rembrandt always infuses things with so much more life. What we're starting to see is that Rembrandt is able to show people in their, air quotes, native habitat and show them off to their best advantage. I wanted for us to be able to place this in a zone where you realize who Rembrandt is in terms of receiving commissions. Just 3 years after this portrait of the gold wearer, he receives a commission for the Night Watch. And it's the novelty of how Rembrandt presents individuals on display here. This massive painting that he completed in 1642 for the Guild of the Cloveneers. It was like a rifleman's guild, a group of guys that are protecting Amsterdam as they're getting themselves together for a parade. He has taken again to a completely new point where it's a different staging of an event. It is absolutely filmic because everyone is doing something. It's not just a bunch of guys sitting around a table, even like a Franz Hals. They're mustering for a parade. One guy is, drumming. Somebody else is starting to put the ramrod down his gun. The Captain Bangkok is giving the direction to lead. His lieutenant is ready to bark it out there. He's got all of these different portraits of people who paid as much as 1,800 guilders to be in the painting. And we know who they are because their names are listed on the escutcheon that's on the arch behind them.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Which became ever more visible when they cleaned it, because it wasn't a night scene, it's a day scene.
Right.
It just got,
night watch.
Yeah, it had gotten dirty.
Who's this little lit up angelic figure?
Everybody asked, well, that's a strange little allegorical figure, and she's got a dead chicken hanging from her waist, and that cloven, the claws of the chicken, are emblematic reference to the Cloveneers, the guys with the guns.
Oh, it's their attribute.
Yes, and then there's even this little kid running in with oak leaves on his hat, which is also, you guys will be famous for protecting the town.
Huh.
This is a completely dynamic scene. It's spilling towards us as opposed to moving from side to side. It's not a panorama anymore. It's allowing us in and having it spill out to us like one would expect any Baroque painting to do. They're going to parade right into our space. And he uses that to create this image, which, by the way, was cut down quite substantially. I think it lost as much as 1.5 feet off of the left-hand side and maybe 14 inches off the top. Yeah, here's the thing. So we painted it for this guild. It was installed in their guild hall. And then later they moved to a different guild hall. And they're like, so they cut it down to fit between these two doors,
Nice.
which is kind of heartbreaking. And there's always been the rumor that he took a lot of heat for people being upset with how they were portrayed in this.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. And you would recognize him if you were to really peek in there. You'll see a one beret and an eye sticking up between two guys.
Self-portrait.
There it is. Just like sort of showing
Right.
in there. But it's just
Cheeky bastard.
totally. But it's just his way of capturing all of the liveliness of these individuals. He can do it in paint, but boy, he can do it in print as well. And so I wanted us to have two opportunities to see how uniquely he could give us images. Jan Cornelius Sylvius is a preacher that was vaguely related to Rembrandt in some way. And he gave us a living portrait of this preacher who he respected deeply. In 1633, he's looking straight at us. Again, this marvelous trope that Rembrandt is using of the shadow on the wall behind, which allows a contrast that almost gives a halo to the preacher. And it's that same use of, for instance, that you'll see here in the Night Watch, where Van Gogh has extended his hand, but the shadow of that hand is falling onto the left of it, right?
Boy.
And you can see that, okay, I've been told what to do. And he's saying, here you go. And the guy's going, okay, I'm going to get it going.
Right.
He uses the light and the gesture in such a smart way. Here we have this older gentleman that you clearly know he respects. But the thing to me that we would show in class that I always thought was just the coolest of the cool was one of the same preacher done in 1646. And it's a posthumous portrait. You remember this one, Emma?
Sure.
Tell us more. I love this portrait.
Yeah, this one's great. So this is one in which the portrait sitter is in a circular window almost and leaning on the sill.
Like
whatever.
almost trompe-l'oeil, right?
Yes, totally. And his hand is extending out so much so that his hand is casting its shadow down onto the structure of this window. So it's very coming at you. And then also there's the profile of his face
on the same kind of
shadow on the portal. There you go.
Yeah. And he's got his fingers in the book. He's going to speak to us. And the engraving of all the letters around this are not Rembrandt.
Right.
It was obviously handed off to an engraver to do all the beautiful backwards lettering. Rembrandt doesn't need to bother with that crap. Here we have this tremendous image of someone who is speaking from beyond the grave. His words were so apt and so powerful. He was such a great preacher that you can remember his sermons after he's left. And he's literally speaking from the other side. Yeah, and speaking out to us. That Baroque sense of being there and making something appear in your presence. Think about how big this is. It blows my mind. I think it's sometimes fun to just zoom in on these guys. And I encourage you to do so to see how, with line only, Rembrandt goes bite after bite after bite into the acid to create these high contrast. It's almost a film noir shadow, you know? It finally occurred to me that's what that is. And they're so humanizing.
This portrait of Jan Sylvius, the preacher, with his hand coming out through the tomb, as it were, there's a really wonderful image you can zoom very tight in on.
And you realize that
the Victoria and Albert Museum.
And you can see that he's got a fur collar on his robe. And you can see that the whiskers are just very thin, very vaporous, like almost as thinly placed as some little old lady's hair, you know. But he has eyes open, his mouth is slightly open. He's literally speaking to us from beyond the tomb. And it's amazing to me how much Rembrandt cares about this individual and the words that he could speak, but also knowing that there was a market for people who would enjoy that kind of understanding of the word. This is how the understanding of the biblical message would have been at its best. And I think it shows that Rembrandt has that sense of belief, of faith, of making things come to life, and his belief in that. I wanted to share another quick one with you. Ephraim Bonus, a Jewish physician. This is a portrait that he did in 1647. And this is a Jewish surgeon, physician, and it's probably it was so highly polished in its making that it almost looks like it could be a painting. It shows you that there's a market for understanding who people are and documenting what they've become. It's the intelligence of this man, in an interior with his hand on a banister. He's obviously been doing well because he's got a fur wrap on him. But these are faces, this is almost a blinking likeness. He's not just a stuffed puppet. If it were a Van Dyck, it'd be a gorgeous looking guy who has absolutely nothing behind his eyes. But there's always something about how it's a almost speaking likeness. It's got an activity to it, even when it's this polished. How many different kinds of black can you find in this image? Hundreds, and it's just astonishing to me.
And all line.
All in line, because aquatint isn't even a thing. We'll get to that another day. But here's the other one that would always get the students riled up.
Oh, yeah.
Which is so amazing. Also done in 1647. And you can see that Rembrandt has completely hit the mark. He knows exactly how to get the essence of an important individual and put them in an interior. But he also gives us the interior of their brain, their psychology in all of this. This is a portrait of Jan 6. It's a good size print. It's 10 by 7.5. And it is all dark except for a very small part of it. And tell them what they see.
Yeah, it's a young man who is leaning against a windowsill reading a book that he has the cover flipped back. It looks like a magazine.
It almost does, yes.
Right. And the only light is coming in through the window. So it's illuminating him and his curly hair in an angelic fashion and illuminating the books that are on that chair across from him.
This has got the Baroque curtain that's being pulled aside that you would see in high Baroque Counter-Reformation things, but it's a Dutch interior. This is a 29-year-old young man who Rembrandt was very good friends with, who would go on to be a burgomaster of Amsterdam. He's a young humanist who had just come back from his travels. He's a very highly evolved intellect who is a good human being. You can see that he's set his weapons aside and he has now picked up reading material. The light is shining on the material that he's reading as though he's an enlightened human being, that he knows that he needs to be a part of the outer world as much as a part of this inner world, which is beautifully appointed. So much so that there's a painting on the back wall with a curtain that goes across it, which is a very standard fare in that time because you wanted to protect the paintings from too much light and smoke and whatnot. But it's just this fantastic image of quietude, of study, of care, of intellect. And it's the same Jan 6 that belongs to the Sixes Bridge. There was a long tradition of them enjoying each other's friendship. The students loved this one for obvious reasons.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And then I had to throw in a couple others just because here's an example of Jan Lutma. This is from 1656. Almost 10 years later. Jan Lutma, at the time, he was a very old man, but he had been a goldsmith. There are sources that would say this chair that he's sitting that has these lion heads on the side, which are the same. You'd almost think, hey, did you borrow that chair from Vermeer? But it's as though he's a lion in winter. His tools of his trade of being a goldsmith are on the table beside him. At this age, he's frustrated with his shortness of vision, but the knowledge that is held in that face is remarkable. I also think those are some of the best drawn hands that Rembrandt ever did.
Mm-hmm.
There are times when his hands get a little questionable,
Hands are tough.
but when they're tiny, it's pretty amazing. The sensitivity of it, it's the care. You can't make an image like this without really taking the time to understand your sitter and be scribing it into a plate backwards and then print it and have it become this image that people will be wanting. I believe this is the last portrait I'm including, except for a self-portrait by Rembrandt, which is of Clement de Jong, who would be the print seller who would catalog all of Rembrandt's possessions, because by 1651, Rembrandt has gotten himself into such a bad state with his financial affairs that he's been sued, and if people want to get their money back for what he owes on his home. And my source here says, by 1656, he's declared bankruptcy.
Oh.
Completely bankrupt. They have to sell off all of his possessions, everything. He's already been trying to auction off prints that he's made and paintings. I mean, he has zero money. He's been living in an apartment, a rented home, even though he's still trying to pay off this home that he bought in the wealthy part of town in 1639. inventory made of his possessions not sold the previous year. The list reveals him to have been a voracious collector of works of art, weapons, and curios, both natural and man-made. It's interesting to realize by this time, Saskia had died in 1642, and that broke his heart. And then he falls on all of this financial hardship. He keeps making his prints. He's making some money from these things. He has also, by the way, after his wife died, taken on a woman. Her name is Geertruydt Dirks, and she becomes the mistress, his mistress, but she's tending the one living child, Titus. He's also lost like 4 other children right way up. And she tends, and believed that she was going to be his common law wife. But eventually they get a maid named Hendrika Stoffels, who is lovely and young and just comes to help out in the house. And somehow she's more interesting to Rembrandt. So there's some suing, and then there's some, you have to pay her some alimony. And none of this is done through marriage. This is all naughty. Oh. And boards of experts are saying, you need to pay her this. And she's
modern.
Yeah. It's pretty gnarly.
When
See,
married,
Geertruydt sues Rembrandt for breach of marital promise.
Wow.
The Chamber of Marital Affairs orders him to pay her an annual allowance of 200 guilders, slightly more than Rembrandt had previously offered. And eventually, she puts him through hell, and he and Hendrika Stoffels move off to this amusement park.
Oh.
Where donks are barfing on his steps.
Oh, no.
So Rembrandt has gone from cock of the walk to...
Oh, boy.
Yeah. And ultimately, by 1660, Hendrik Stoffels and Titus then become the proprietors of his sale. So they just make it so that he doesn't have to work with money at all.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. They relieve Rembrandt of all financial responsibility.
That's not good.
They have to, because otherwise people are going to sue him more and take everything.
I thought you were going to say that Hendrika and Titus...
No.
Okay.
No. And then Titus predeceases Rembrandt, but Hendrika has a child by Rembrandt, but it's out of wedlock, so there's another big problem with that. They sue her because she wanted to get the child baptized in a church, but she was a bastard child. So here's some dirt on our friend, poor Rembrandt.
Goodness.
So he's doing this portrait of a guy who is his print dealer. He's the reason we have a list of all of the prints in a real sensible order.
Right.
But look at that face.
Yeah.
That's a dealer. As opposed to an old lion in winter. Look at him. And it's just that one hand and the other hand is hidden.
Mark.
Right? Mm-hmm. It's quite telling. So I wanted to give you the last self-portrait that Rembrandt etches. This one is done in 1648. There's 2 states of it, so it's very interesting to see how he changes his own expression seated by a windowsill. You can see him essentially just staring right at the camera, the selfie. Look at how much his expression changes.
Wow.
He's lost 3 of his 4 kids by Saskia. Only Titus has survived. His mother has just died. His wife has died. He's in the middle of this nasty separation with Titus's nurse, Geertje. His finances worsen, but he is also a guy who's making the most popular portraits in the 17th century. And so you wonder, he does this image. Will this one sell as well? I think it's so freaking candid.
Yeah. It's startling, really.
It's 1648, so he's 42 years old. And it's like
42.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think it's a midlife crisis. This is some heavy-duty self-analysis. Look at how he's changed the corner of the desk so that it's literally coming towards us. I don't know if it seems as though he's looking at himself with a sort of frustration.
Yeah.
So we have this pensive face, and they'll say it's not ideal, it's matter of fact. He's working, he's etching, but I still think about how he looks frustrated and defeated somewhat.
He looks a little bewildered.
Yeah, that's more to it. Yeah, literally, because various sources say he's completely clueless about money.
Yeah.
He buy cool stuff. Think about if we were to put that at this end of this parade of self-portraits, and we start to realize that you really can look at this barometer of his life all the way through. So I thought we'd throw that out there because we get to see a man making himself, not only through just the environments of the land around him, through the people who are taking a wee in the land around and looking at how he's pissed off everybody around him. But the next thing we'll need to discuss would be his biblical works, and in that he shines like a true, true, true star. So that's our little buddy Rembrandt.
Crazy.
Yeah, just knowing that these are all of the many moods. And this isn't even the paintings,
Right.
but it's almost more real than the paintings,
Well, I think just because of that autographic thing we always talk about, that because they look like sketches, they feel more immediate and less labored, and
Mm-hmm.
right.
Well, and that seems to always be the case,
Right.
If you look at Rubens' sketches for his grandiose images, you're like, God, those sketches are kick-ass. And you look at the gesture that Rembrandt can render a figure. If you think it's great with these portraits, just wait till you see it with those biblical images. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
It's just so
He's
alive.
sensitive.
Yeah, I think your point about him looking bewildered is absolutely it. He's like a youngest, looking with dewy eyes at the world, like, look at that, and look at those ears, and look how cool that guy's that nose. I want to use that face in my painting of this and that, and wear this cape and put this on, and it's just always what's going to come out next.
And also, this must have some assurance in his own mind of his own talent,
Oh yes,
but that life has turned out this way. Like, wait, I should not have fallen into these circumstances.
how could this be happening?
this be
I'm
happening?
Rembrandt,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there he is. He's looking awfully bewildered. But
Bewildered.
he's going to make some of the greatest religious art.
Yeah.
Off we go.
Okay. Thanks for part 2. That was.
It's a thing.
It's a thing.
Poor guy.
Oh. Thanks, Tru.
Thank you so much for joining us for number 2 of 3 on Rembrandt van Rijn. We here at Platemark are delighted to be on this journey with you and hope you are enjoying it as much as we are. I always need to thank Tru Ludwig for being our SME, our subject matter expert. Nobody does it better. And I also need to thank Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. I hope you all remember that any image we talk about is over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. I think it's useful, obviously, to see the works as we talk about them, so hopefully you're taking advantage of that. My name is Ann Shafer, and I thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next time.